You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the nonprofit news outlet exploring solutions for sustainability in water. I am the host, Travis Loop. For this episode, we are going in the newsroom with Antoine Walter, the host of the Don't Waste Water podcast, and he generates a lot more incredible content about the water industry. Antoine, I am excited to finally have a co-podcaster in the newsroom. How are you doing?
Well, I'm amazed to be here, Travis. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm doing great and I'm excited about the conversation.
Yeah. I've been wanting to kind of have a mashup like this, if you will, for quite some time. Huge fan of your content. I think your production quality and your analysis of the water industry are like tops in the world. I mean that sincerely. So super cool to have you on. And that's what I really talk about is kind of the business of water. I've seen so many of your different episodes and videos digging into all the dollars and cents and transactions and all that moves around the world. I want to share some of that with the audience here. I guess like big picture, if you're to look at the water industry as a financial sector, if you will, how do you describe that right now? What's the overview that you would give to people?
That's an easy question to start, right? First,
Yeah.
very often people will pick on the term water industry and say the industry doesn't really exist. And to a certain extent, that is true. I'm not going to pick on it just because that would take us on a sidetrack. I think if I had to present it, there's the view people from the inside may have, which is like we're at an inflection point, it's super big, lots of stuff happening. And then there's the view from the outside, which is, well, those guys maybe exist. I'm not sure they do. So we have to always balance a bit of those two positions, which is from the inside, we're noticing pretty spectacular changes over the past, let's say, 3 to 5 years. From the outside, we're still like a confetti on the general maps of stuff which are going on in business. So it's a bit of a dichotomy which you have to balance, especially when you speak with financial people, which have to have like a broader perspective, a broader portfolio view, and where you're just some of the assets they are invested in. And I mean, a good example of the maturity of where we stand in the water sector is that I'm still the one doing chronicles over it, and I'm just a water engineer. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a financial journalist. So that also gives you a sense of how immature we still are.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I know you say you're not a journalist, and maybe you're technically not a journalist, but the job you are doing covering the water industry and putting out information is some quality reporting at least in my eyes, Antoine.
Appreciate it.
So you can have both when it comes to the water business. You can have both of these things going on right now, right? You can have some really exciting growth, some more business happening within the sector, but you can still be just a piece of confetti on the street to the rest of the global economy, right?
I guess it's a matter of benchmark. To what are we comparing water? If you're comparing water to AI, well, no discussion here, no comparison possible for sure. We are not even a confetti. We still simply don't exist. If you're comparing water to energy, to clean tech, we are still much smaller than that and a bit less sexy than that. But it starts to move a bit the needle. If you look at the various stages of water, like early stage, growth stage, later stage, and then listed companies. The closer we are is on the listed companies end. If you look at the valuation of listed water companies, they are maybe 30% under clean tech companies. But 30% is the same order of magnitude. Whereas if you look at the investment in earlier stage, well, roughly 2 to 3% of the overall investment in clean tech goes to water. And then I say 2 to 3%, that's the optimistic view because you never really know. A lot of the deals are not public. My personal estimate is more along the lines of 0.2 to 0.3%. So that's 2 orders of magnitude smaller than our closest neighbor, if I may say that way, which is clean tech or energy or whatever we want to define that new wave. So it's interesting to compare the sector to the right benchmarks because that also gives a hint at those guys did it 10 years before us. So if we look what they did wrong and right, then we have a good indication of what we can adapt to the water field.
Mm. You mentioned that maybe a few years ago, 3 years, 5 years, there's kind of been some action happening, I'll just call it that. Could you break that down a little bit and what the trend has been? What changes have been happening over the past, however many years you wanna kinda put on that?
We were chit chatting before starting about having good health and good habits and stuff like that. It's usually the thing you do on the 31st of December, and you decide that for the 1st of January, you're going to take so and so much changes in your life, and then it doesn't happen. I think for years, the water industry has been a bit like that. Like, oh, we would need more finance. Oh, if only people were to look at us. And then, yeah, the year was going on and it was business as usual. I think what's changed is that they are now specialist investors who are looking at the market and saying, there's an asymmetrical bet to do here because the ticket to enter is not that high. And if some of the rewards materialize, then the multiples will happen. I think the water sector ticks at a special pace. It's slower than other sectors. It doesn't lend itself to building a Uber or an Nvidia from scratch. But on the other hand, it's also a strongly protected market. Like water companies don't die. Water companies, when they are established, when they make it to the main market, well, it's difficult to displace them because it's slow in both directions. So an investment in water is somewhat safer than an investment in a super trendy field. And some started looking at that and say, okay, if we can start to get multiples while having less of the risk, then there is an investment thesis to build. And there was a first wave of, let's say, early stage investors that were mildly successful in the water field, but they instigated that idea that if you look at it seriously and you double down on what they did right and wrong, then you can do better. And that is the second generation of early stage water investors we're seeing now. To give names, you have Burnton Ventures, you have Pure Terra Ventures, you have Echo River Capital, and then some more like Emerald, like all the ones I'm forgetting and which are going to be mad at me because I'm forgetting them. But they cut like several dozens of checks over the past 3 to 5 years. So quite a lot of movement in a field which was a bit more quiet, and they generated an interest. Now, what also is to be noted is that there were roughly 1,400 different investors that cut a check in early stage water investment over the past 5 years. Some of them did a one and done. Like really 84% of water investors cut a check and then they hold and they see what happens. So the truth somewhat is in the pudding. When we see down the line in 5 years or in 10 years, what will be the multiples of that second generation or first generation of real professional water early stage investors, then we have a better idea of what water can become as an investment thesis. And if really the expected multiple materialize and those funds are successful, then that proves the field as an investment thesis. And then that means that all the stages of the pyramid can get some new type of funding.
Fascinating. It makes me think of a couple other aspects of the water sector. Some of the things you said, we seem to always be jealous of like the climate sector because climate is getting so much attention, and the people in the water world are like, hey, over here, what about us? The energy, you described how the energy industry is so much more advanced. I see those kind of in parallel. And then you always hear about the water sector as an industry, or at least the utility side, being very conservative, very slow to move, being behind other industries in a lot of different ways. And I kind of heard some of those same characteristics when you're talking about, I guess, the investment side of water. It's just interesting to kind of see those similarities there. So, what are some of the types of businesses that are attracting capital and investment? What types? Yeah, I guess that's one half of the question. I'll come back to the other part.
So we have to divide into the different types of capital.
Mm.
I would give you a different answer when it comes to later stage growth, and then the early stage. On the early
Well, can I
stage,
can I can I interrupt you for a second? And actually, can you give a little breakdown for people that aren't as familiar with that evolution of a business and investment and capital and kind of what those phases are?
so in the traditional acception of the definition, you have the very early stage where the company just hit the roads, they reached a certain product market fit, but now you have to throw money at it. It's not profitable, but you're going to build some fabrication capabilities, and then you're going to market it to more places and hire people and grow as fast as you can, while hoping that at some point you'll get profitable. If you're Uber, you're allowed to go out and be absolutely unprofitable for 15 to 20 years and everybody's happy. If you're in the water sector, that time frame is much shorter. You're going to be expected to be profitable much sooner, and hypergrowth is not really the path. So that would be like until you're profitable would be the early stage. And then once you're profitable, then you enter the later stage where it's about what do you want to become? Do you want to be a prey for one of the bigger players that will grab you and do some external R&D with you, or do you want to build a giant, in which case you need to make later stage rounds to build something bigger. I'm doing really a muggle definition of all of that because
Yes.
again, I'm learning it every day. I'm a water guy and an engineer. I'm not a finance guy, so I have to teach myself finance on a daily basis. So that would be like my fundamental divide:
Yeah,
pre-profitability, post-profitability. Maybe something
got it.
important to mention here is that it's the body of research of Paul Callahan, the founder of BlueTech, who showed that for a technology to be in the middle of the market in the water sector, historically, it takes 16 to 25 years. So that is the time frame. So all the investors will tell you that they are picking winners and they know the shortcuts. And to a certain extent, that is true. But they go much faster than something very slow. And so you have to see that the truth is in the middle. So
It's
it's
all
yeah.
relative, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that breakdown. And then back to your the question I first posed.
So to the question, I think there are a couple of answers in the early stage. You have the water specialists who invests in a certain vision of what would be sexy long term for the big guys, because that's the best exit route as you become the external R&D. So that's going to be along the lines of industrial water, digitization of the sector, of PFAS destruction, all those theses. Everybody has a different sensibility to each field, and so each investor is a bit different. But the water specialists are leading to that. Then the people coming from the outside who cut some checks in water, think Breakthrough Energy Ventures, for instance, who's pretty famous for that. Um, they have a special love for atmospheric water generation, because if you're a tech guy, that's what resembles the most tech. Like you can
That's just the
disrupt the
coolest
system.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is cool stuff,
No
right?
pipes, no networks, no liabilities. You just create water out of thin air. And they've cut like gigantic checks to a full bunch and a full array of atmospheric water generation companies. Even if you look at this year, the latest rounds which happened were atmospheric water generation companies. And that's true in all geographies. It's true in Europe, it's true in the US, it's true everywhere. There is really this attraction to it. I would have personally a, um, a reservation on that, which is the laws of thermodynamics still apply. So it's
It,
great to do big bets and to throw money at it, but so far it's not a proven path. But
mm,
I might
mm.
be um, the non-believer here, and I don't want to be negative. It's just that from the outside, there's an appeal for that very specific thing, and you see that the insiders go somewhat in different direction, which tells you that maybe, yeah,
Mm,
there
gotcha.
there there is some element of truth to being worried about investing like as much as it is investing in atmospheric regeneration. No, it will sound like I'm hating on that subsector. It's not the fact. I think they have their place under the sun as a way to displace bottled water, but not as a way to replace American water, if I can make
Right,
that
right.
analogy.
That,
For the second part of your question, was on the later stage. So what do they do? We see a very strongly reinforced interest over the past 2-3 years for private equity to invest in water and to start consolidating some companies. Not to the extent I'm yet to see a new US filter. Like everybody is making bets about would that happen. So if you don't have the context, US Filter is what Dick Heckman bought with 400 acquisitions across mostly the US, but also the rest of the world. And he built a water giant from scratch, which he then sold to a French company at the time, Vivendi, now Veolia, and did a spectacular return. And the water sector being so atomized and scattered and fragmented, there is an interesting and appealing investment thesis in doing that again, because it seems to be something, yeah, doable and attractive. But we are in the early stages of that. We see private equity companies starting to build some flocks of water
Yeah,
companies.
yeah.
It's yet to be the big giant, but the reinforced interest of PE is very something which started maybe 18 months ago or 2 years ago, and it's spectacular in the uptake it takes.
Very interesting. So kind of consolidating all these different companies, build a portfolio of companies that offer different solutions, make that portfolio very valuable, and then someone else comes along and buys that, right? And you make money off that. Interesting. Just random membranes is something I always see articles about, and companies coming up with the latest and greatest membrane, and it's better because of this and this and this. Just your take on the membrane industry.
Membrane is a very interesting field. There are specialized podcasts which deal only with membranes, and they have new episodes every week with new types of membranes, new approach, and new takes on membrane. Membranes have this element of being, I said atmospheric refrigeration is the closest to tech. If I go to realistic water application, membrane is maybe then the second closest to tech, because you have a barrier to entry because you need to build hardware. But once you've built the hardware, then it's replacing the membrane on a regular basis, and then it turns into recurring revenue. So you can compare it to Nespresso if you're a bit of an older, if you have older references, let's say, or you can compare it to tech and say it's really like, yeah, software
Yeah.
as a service, but just this time it's not software, it's membranes as a service. So that is why membranes have an appeal. And then there is always this element in membrane that a new material comes up every once in a while and has the premise of disrupting the existing. And that happened regularly of the history of membrane, that a new material came up and took the biggest lion's share. Now, I would tend to believe that we are reaching an asymptote where you can still marginally do better, but not in a fashion like it was when the PVDF and polymeric membranes took over the polyether membranes. Sorry to be techie here, but the element
No,
is,
it's more incremental than making
yeah,
the big leaps. Yeah.
there are still like super interesting bets. If you look at a company like Zvitterco, doing Zwitter ionic membranes, or I mean, I just named one, but you can have all the ceramic guys, all the graphene guys. It's super interesting, but I think now it's more catering to specific niches. Like there was an element of making membranes main stage. That's done. Now you have membranes in almost every single application you can think of in water. Now it's about tailoring them exactly to the needs. You're not going to use the same membrane if you want to recover specific minerals from the wastewater of a semiconductor facility than if you want to be removing PFAS from a drinking water treatment plant. Or when I say PFAS, could be even much simpler, removing coliforms from a drinking water plant. So you have that full array of applications, which also lends itself to specialized bets. Something to bridge with my previous answer is that the big water companies don't do research and development, or almost not. Like if you look at the share of their turnover, they invest in R&D. It's probably below 2%. So the way they do R&D is external R&D. It might be partnership with startups, it might be acquiring startups, or it might be just doing
Watching.
white labeling.
Watching.
And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Very.
that's what we're seeing in the membrane world. All those guys are basically running for the big membrane companies to look at who is doing what and then pick winners.
Interesting. Just to throw out another topic that constantly comes across my feed, if you will, is desalination, right? And what's happening with desal? Where's the next big evolution in this? If only we could make this less energy intensive, it can solve the world's water needs. I think Elon even talked about that. You might have even done a little piece on it, right? Like desal is the holy grail here when it comes to tech and industry. Thoughts on that one?
Elon looked at it from like Mars, I guess, and then you have like a very broad picture, and the very broad picture is right. Desalination is about energy. On that, he's right. Then when you zoom in, it's a bit more complex than that. So you can always make desalination a bit more efficient, but here again, we are reaching the asymptote. There is a limit in terms of thermodynamics in how efficiently you can extract water from the water and salt bond. So there are still very interesting bets in desalination, like subsea desalination, where you put your desalination plant, instead of putting it on the shore, you put it 400 meters under the water, and then you benefit from all that free pressure from the ocean, and you have a better water quality at the bottom of the ocean than on the shore. So very, very great idea, and there are lots of other great ideas in the field, but you can only become so much better than the incumbent. And the biggest problem with desalination is that moving water is super difficult. Like moving water is simple. You take a pump and a pipe, but it's super expensive in terms of energy needed. So as soon as you go further away from the shore, then desalination becomes something very expensive in terms of energy, and very fast other approaches become more efficient and hence preferred. If you look at what the world needs to add in terms of water capacity, everybody looks at desalination because it's sexy. You have all that 97% of water which is in the oceans, and then if you can grab just some drops of it, and then you can solve the water scarcity everywhere. But actually, 4 times bigger than desalination, you have wastewater reuse. And wastewater reuse, I mean, you did a full
Absolutely,
series on
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that people have asked me, what you're in. I was in California for a whole week, kind of visiting all these facilities, and I was asked a lot of times as I was talking to regular people, why not just do desalination? The ocean's right there, and I do not have the financial numbers, but I know that just treating that wastewater to whatever purpose you want to use it for is however many shades more affordable. You might even know those numbers, but it's like, hey, this makes a lot more financial sense.
Overall, it's about 4 times cheaper.
4 times. There you go.
Then you have the specifics of it, which is that wastewater reuse can be even cheaper on two different levels, which is that you don't need to do. I mean, when we speak of reuse, everybody thinks of let's get drinking water. But the water we drink is 0.1% of the entire water cycle, because the water we drink is a section of the water we use at home, which itself is a section of the overall water cycle. So when we focus on that, which is what we do today with our water infrastructure, we are doing water. We are producing water at a quality level which doesn't make sense for most of the applications. Whereas if we do wastewater reuse, you can do reuse fit for purpose. And reuse fit for purpose all of a sudden can have a lot of welcome side effects. Like, we are removing nitrogen and potassium from wastewater treatment because that's not what you want to put in your rivers, for sure. But if you're reusing your wastewater for agriculture uses, well, in agriculture, you need that nitrogen and that potassium. And if it doesn't come from the water, you will need to put some substrates and fertilizers. So you could reduce your fertilizer load, reduce your water load, and at the same time, be covered for water scarcity if you're just reusing your wastewater. It's a matter of breaking silos and making stuff which is like evident for water professionals, understandable for the greater public, which is exactly what you're doing with your series on the reuse in California. My example to that, which I'm coming back to it all the time, is we had, I think 2 years ago in France, some riots around water use for agriculture. Like, literally riots. It made the news. Like, it looked like civil war. You had ecologic people charging against right-wing people and battling it out with police in the middle, just over water in France, where arguably we have water. So
And they
that
were
is
upset.
happening.
They were upset because you were putting recycled wastewater on farm
No,
fields, and
they were upset because the farmers were taking the groundwater and storing it on the surface. That way they had it available. And so they were fighting a lot around the use of that water. And what no one clicked is that just next to those fights and riots, there was a wastewater treatment plant which was outputting 4 times the volume of water that they were fighting on. And it crossed the mind of nobody that if you just slightly uptreat that water, and you solve everyone's issues. But if you never clicked that it's even a possibility to close the water loop, I mean,
there you go.
you're
Nicely
well
done.
placed to know that it is a loop. um,
Yeah.
then simply that's not within the realm of possibles. And just to close the parenthesis on desalination, wastewater reuse is becoming super affordable thanks to desalination. It's the same technologies, just applied to easier
Reverse
field.
osmosis. Yeah, interesting. Another side note here, taking us in a different direction. I mean, there's the public awareness element that you just brought up, right? People being aware of these opportunities. I was really struck in my travels through California, the awareness and support that there is in communities for wastewater recycling. They, as in the utilities and the municipalities, have done such a great job for the past 10, 20 years, actually talking about this, that people are aware and on board. El Paso, Texas, which is going to be the first, treated wastewater right back into that drinking water system. They're at like over 85% of their community says, bring it on. We will drink that water. The San Diego area, which had the setback because of toilet to tap. That's where that phrase really sabotaged their efforts 20 years ago. They said that they're, over 75% of their community now is on board with drinking that water. So it can happen. It is possible. It takes a lot of work, but yeah.
There's an element of necessity to it. If you understand why you're doing it, then all of a sudden it makes much more sense. When that came up in San Diego 20 years ago, I think water scarcity was a concept which was not lived as we're living it today. And if you look at places in the world where that reuse of water up to potable levels has taken off the most, well, it's places where water is a necessity. Like you have Singapore. When Singapore took its independence from Malaysia, the first thing Malaysia said is, the day you're not agreeing with us, we shut you the water. So Singapore was thinking, okay, we need to gain water independence because that's part of the independence process. And so they became like the leading country in the world when it comes to water because everybody was on board that was a necessity. The same is true in Israel. The same is true in Namibia. The same is true in all the places where water all of a sudden was on the critical path and everybody noticed. And I think if you go to Lake Mead and you see the level of Lake Mead, you're like, maybe if in your lifetime you don't remember seeing that lake full, well, long term, something's happening. And even if you go to the extreme, I take Lake Mead, so let's take the neighbor example. In Las Vegas, every single casino is reusing their water. Like it's a closed loop. Why so? Because if not,
necessity.
they would be out of business. So
yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, incredible. There's a million different paths to shoot down here, but let's bring it back to your coverage of the financial side of water here. One of your recent pieces talked about kind of trends for 2025 that you're keeping an eye on. What part of the water industry, what businesses, whatever it might be, you have the closest eye on. Maybe you've touched on some of this already, but wanted to open that one up and get your thoughts on this year that we're somehow halfway through.
So one pretty hot topic, because it is also reaching the greater public, is the water impact of AI and data centers. If you do the maths, it's not yet that big of an issue, but as there is a strong attention to it, it is another spot. I think I'm going to give credit where it's due. Saurabh Singh from BlueTech sent me his analysis a couple of days ago, where he was reading through the latest yearly report from Microsoft. And for the first time in history, Microsoft saw their water use in data center go down. And not because data centers are not booming. We do know that data centers are booming everywhere in the world. The reason is that they focused heavily on ways to close their water cycle, on ways to reuse their water, on ways to be a bit more efficient with their water. And those subsectors are exactly at the confluence of water and energy. They put their data centers in places where energy is cheaper because you're in the middle of the desert, you have sun available the full year, and then solar energy is pretty affordable. But on the other hand, if you're in the middle of a desert, you don't have that much water. So you need to find a balance between the two. And being at that confluence of the two is a very good place to be in at this day and age. I mean, people know that when they use ChatGPT, it uses so and so much milliliters of water. So that is in the general public's awareness. So they start putting pressure on all the giants, and all the giants took pledges on water. And then you can believe or not believe the pledges, but at least you can acknowledge that no regulation is pushing them to do anything. And still they take pledges because the general public's pressure is pushing them in that direction.
Yeah,
Now,
this is I was gonna say I've seen a lot of the panic, right, around and the headlines around AI and water, AI and energy. But given who these companies are, Microsoft, Meta, Google, X, Amazon, uh, and that public pressure piece, I have a lot of confidence that they are rushing to solutions, right? They are believers in technology, and they're tapped into ways to use tech. And so you just cited Microsoft's decrease in water and data centers. There it is, right? They're gonna crack this and figure it out. That's the optimist in me.
I think where it connects an interesting dot is that their pledges are on water use overall. It's not on the specific
Mm,
water use in the data
mm.
center. And so, what several, if not all of them, have done is that they've looked at a watershed level and they thought, okay, maybe our data centers can't become spectacularly that much efficient just in a snap, but that local water utility, which is having 20 to 40% of non revenue water because it's just leaking out of the pipes, if we help them fix the pipes, if we help them fix the network, then that counts on our balance sheet. And so we can bring a balance. And if you're like really laser focused on their direct water impact, well, you're like, hey, that's not exactly the same. You're taking water left and you're putting it right. But if you zoom out and
Mm.
say, okay, at watershed level, there is a realistic explanation to say that, okay, it's the same water cycle. Well, we do know how funding can be limited in water infrastructure. So if external funding comes from those giants because they want to bring a balance and bring something nice to their shareholders on their sustainability report, I mean, fine with me. Who
It's a
who
win.
would I be to
Yeah.
judge?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I interrupted you. You were headed to your next point or your
No,
big turn in the
I was
road.
ending exactly
Yeah.
to that,
Okay, got it.
which is exactly to. I mean, it's the two extremes. Like the least sexy there is, which is you have a leaky pipe and you dig out and you replace that leaky pipe and it's solved. And the most sexy, which is how, those gamer computers, which if you were a cool kid in the 2000s, you had that water cooling computer. Well,
Right.
now it's happening at scale. Like you have a full data center, which is water cooled on a closed loop with reused water to feed that loop and to make the makeup water. And actually, those two are the two sides of the same coin. It's happening for the same reasons. And hate it or like it, I think if you're just looking at the results, it is moving the needle. And that is interesting to see because of all the places I was not expecting Microsoft or Amazon to be the ones paying for Thames Water to solve their pipe leakage.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes me think of Tesla a little bit, and they apparently were building something called the Giga Water Loop as part of their pushback or their response to in Texas the water impact of their big Tesla plant. So I tried to reach out for them and see if they might want to give me a grant for funding, so the name piece, but I haven't heard back yet. I also wanted to ask you. I think you are a big proponent of the AI tools. Even in the use of your developing your content, managing it, all that kind of thing. I certainly use some of it myself. Um, you know, what's your personal take? You know, when you hit return on that search, and do you ever think about the water impact there?
Are you calling me out?
No, I
No,
guess I'm
no,
this is I should be asking myself that same question, right?
no, no.
I do. I'm like, okay, here we go. When I say please to the AI, is that using more water? Apparently manners make it use more water, or
Yeah,
when it uses manners back, right?
Sam Altman did a conference on that to say how much more water it was using because people were polite with AI, and his
I'm
conclusion
going to be
was.
nice to the robots. I'm going to be nice to them. Yeah.
But to your question, um, actually, the biggest, if again we zoom out, I was interviewing Ali Smith and Claudia Winkler, who wrote two different books, one on sustainability overall and then one specific on AI, where they looked into the water impact of AI. And the biggest impact is on the training data, like not on the use data. So yeah, sure, when you use it, it still uses a bit of water, but the biggest impact is done long before the user actually comes to put a query. So if you train,
They're putting so much in there. So the volume,
yeah.
right, to do that training. Yeah.
So do I have second thoughts when I'm using AI? Yeah, I think you should. The same is true when you take a plane. You should have a second thought as well. But you know, when I'm looking at the bigger picture, the way I try to maybe post-rationalize it is that um, taking the plane analogy, I think, is a good one. Uh, when you take a plane, you are very conscious of your carbon impact. Like you do know that that thing flying through the airs has a carbon impact, and people know that they should reduce their use of planes overall if they want to reduce, I mean, to bring carbon at a balance. When people open their faucet, they don't realize that actually the water sector has a 10 to 15x higher carbon impact than the planes because we're pumping water around, because we are treating on the both ends of the cycle, and so far and so on. So what I mean by that is that the way I post-rationalize myself, my use of AI, myself, my use of tools is if I use it for the right reasons to bring the message across that we can do better in this, we can do better in that, we can be more transparent about that, we can bring a solution to this, then the overall balance is positive. And a bit like what I was saying about the big guys doing pledges on water, and then if overall the result is positive, even if there is some greenwashing involved at some stages, well, same for me. If overall my impact is positive, then what I'm using as a means to an impact was worth it. The day I'm gossiping about the private life of some CEO in a water company, then I'm out of touch and I should definitely stop using any kind of energy and water to do that.
Got it. All right. Well, you helped me clear my conscience a little bit too there. Um, Getting back to some of the development of tech and the advancement of businesses, all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious about how much the challenges facing water, especially the really acute ones that are visible beyond us in the water space, are driving investors or driving investment or driving industry in the water, driving interest in the water industry, right? Scarcity, the crumbling infrastructure, PFAS, you know, those kind of things that get headlines beyond our space. Is that is that bringing financial interest in, or yeah, just curious.
I think there's what should and there's what is, and those are unfortunately different stuff. Like the seminal report where everybody is coming back to it on water scarcity is the one which was made for I think the World Bank at the time, but by McKinsey, and it's in 2015. And in 2015, they found out that there is this gap of 40% between water demand and water supply by 2030. And we looked at this gap like, oh, big gap, we should invest everything. And but we keep citing that report, which has now almost 10 years, which was updated by the same team, which now found out that it's maybe rather 60% than 40%. So it's not really heading in the right direction. Um, and the bottom line is, you know, as long as you're not hitting the wall, it's hard for people to even believe that there's a wall. It's a bit this Don't Look Up movie, which
Yeah.
made Netflix like 2 years ago. as long as you don't look up, there is no asteroid. Nothing's happening. And unfortunately, you need to encounter a hard fact element, and it's day zero in Cape Town. It's Flint, water pollution and lead lines. It's those riots in water riots in France. It's all those elements. When they happen, then all of a sudden people get cautious. And to me, the most striking example was all my neighbors had no clue about PFAS. Like it wasn't even a concept. Like you have to put yourself in the shoes of people who are not in the water sector. PFAS is four letters of probably an acronym where they have no clue what that is.
Yeah.
And in 2023, we received at home a letter saying, okay, Veolia, who's our local utility, tested the water and there's high level of PFAS. I happen at the time to be living next to an airport, which makes pretty much sense that there is PFAS next to an airport. And so I saw people with good brains all of a sudden rushing to the supermarket to get bottled water. And the supermarket had to put signs to say, we're limiting you to 2 packs of water. You can't take more because we can't have enough for everybody. And I saw my neighbors, a doctor and a lawyer, who were going with 2 cars. So the mom
Oh my.
and the dad, so that they could get each 2 packs of water because, hey, there's the stuff in water. And before that, I mean, the only mistake that Veolia did was to be transparent and to say, guys, there's something in it, and we are doing something to solve it. They were doing better than any other utility in France was doing at the time, and they got blamed for that. So what I mean
Yep.
by that is now my neighbors know what PFAS is. And because my neighbors know me, I'm the annoying guy to tell them, it's not so much of a big deal. If that water goes through activated carbon, then the PFAS is out, and you can very safely drink your water at just 1% of the price of your bottled water. And on top of that, your bottled water might have exactly as much PFAS in it, just nobody forces them to test it. So you would never know. And
plus those microplastics too. Yeah.
exactly. And my point is, I think in the US is the closest to having like real statistics on that, even if they diverge between 1.3 and 1.7, but there's between 1.3 and 1.7 million water professionals in the US. If each of these 1.3 to 1.7 million water professionals becomes the annoying neighbor who's gonna knock on your shoulders and say, that pack of water maybe has PFAS in it and probably is 200% the price of your or 2,000% the price of your tap water, I would rather stand with the utility so that they get the money to maybe increase the rate by 3% and get the PFAS out for everybody rather than do that. I mean, if we all become that annoying
Absolutely.
neighbor, I think within a generation, we don't have to be the annoying neighbors anymore because everybody's aware. And
Yeah. Well, I've been in one of the U.S. communities where PFAS kind of was an early breaking story. DuPont facility dumped Gen X and some other PFAS in the river for 40 years. It became a big story here in 2017, and it became a big story to where actually everybody knew about it, and they were buying water at the grocery store. But even after our utility spent $43 million to put in granular activated carbon, we all paid $5 more a month on our bill, and we have excellent water. This is high quality water, but people aren't aware of that. So they're still thinking that our water is toxic or they can't trust it and everything. But leading to back to the tech piece, again, every day in my feed, I'm seeing some new company that has a PFAS removal technology or a PFAS destruction technology. And so from I guess, again, an economic financial side of things, how crowded is that space right now? Everyone's rushing to try to solve it.
I mean, it goes in waves, but recently, if you go to a water trade show, every second company, if not every company, period, has a claim about PFAS removal or PFAS destruction. Actually, PFAS removal is something where the technology to do it is pretty common. Use activated carbon, use ion exchange. reverse osmosis if you have a bit of money, and foam fractionation if you're a cool kid. But that is, let's say, in a grabbing distance from the core of the water sector. The open battle is destruction. Destruction is a bit, when we were all done with DVDs because DVDs couldn't stand enough data on it anymore. And before Blu-ray came and said, okay, I'm better than all the other incumbents, well, there were every single company trying out and do something until there was a standard. So I think we're a bit in that phase where everybody's throwing stuff at the wall, and if it sticks, well, it's going to be spectacular. I mean, from a finance perspective, 374 Water went public on the Nasdaq, and they got to a valuation of $700 million. And at the time they were at the valuation of $700 million, they had one pilot at Duke University and one pilot out in the field. So in terms of hype and excitement, I mean, cool technology, no disregard to the company. It's just that when they were valued at 700 million, it was highly overinflated, as much as it has crashed.
There wasn't a lot behind that. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible.
So there's a hype element to it. Now it's a two-stage story. The first stage is remove it. I mean, when we had the discussions around micropollutants 15 years ago, because the analysis methodology getting better, we noticed that there's more stuff in the water than what we thought, and we realized, okay, there is paracetamol and cocaine in the wastewater in Zurich, so maybe you don't have a big deal with paracetamol, but you don't want to take the cocaine. So there were some studies done on what's the best place to remove that from the water cycle, and there is a universal agreement that the best place is to destroy and to go at wastewater and remove it from wastewater treatment, because if you do so, then the full water cycle is free of those. So from a theoretical point of view, that's the best way to do it, because if you do that long term, your pollutant is out. The thing is that if you do that with PFAS, well, you will have to spend more than the world's GDP just to maintain a balance between what is in the environment today and what we're adding within 1 year. So if we don't try to remove what's out there, we just try to not add more to it, it would cost more than the world's GDP. So the problem is that it is highly unaffordable today to remove PFAS or destroy PFAS from wastewater. So we are resorting to the best second guess, which is to take it out of drinking water. And that way we, the humans in the short water cycle, are protected. And then all the other stages of the water cycle, unfortunately, are exposed. But that is the best we can do, at least to protect humans' health.
At least we're not drinking it. Yeah. Which is, I just have to say, still just a piece of the pie of how we are exposed to PFAS. In the US, I think it's like maybe 10 to 20% of human exposure comes through drinking water. And I think that 20% number is high. I think it's closer to 10%. So again, a lot of hysteria around PFAS in the water when it's floating in the dust in my office right now.
For decades now, after a desalination plant, we are putting back minerals in the water because we're afraid that if you drink deionized water, well, it's going to drain the minerals out of your body, and then you're going to die out from drinking water. Actually, 3% of the minerals we are ingesting come from what we drink. 97% of the minerals come from what we eat. And in what we eat, through the way our food is produced and processed, the mineral rate is going dramatically down. So there, the shift is much more important than in water. But in water, it's much easier to grab, much easier to understand why deionized water is something which is really non-natural. And so you can focus on that. And the same is happening with PFAS. I think the figure I had was 25%. So we have the two ends of the window is somewhere probably between those 10 and 25%.
Yes.
But even so, that means 75% of PFAS come from places which today we hardly grab.
Right. Yeah. People are putting contact lenses in their eyes that are coated with PFAS. But let me we've been talking for quite a while here, which is awesome. I think we can keep going and going and going. But I wanted to ask you, getting back to the idea that you do so much incredible analysis, reporting, and talking about the water business, especially financial figures, business transactions, executives getting put in place or moved along. And then you're at a lot of these conferences talking to these folks. Just curious about, the reaction How do people feel about all the attention and the specifics that are getting out there through your work and your content?
I think it's mostly positive. It's almost exclusively positive, but when it's negative, it's strongly
Ooh,
negative.
you'll hear something from somebody, right? Yeah, yeah.
The beauty of, and I insist, not being a journalist is that I'm not in it for the Pulitzer Prize, and I'm genuinely a cheerleader for this industry. I mean, I'm a second generation water professional. My parents met at the engineering school I ended up attending. So, I mean, it's baked in me for forever that I'm a water guy, and I'm still a water guy when I'm trying to make sense of the finance stuff happening in water right now. So I try to not cover the bad stories too much. And to be honest, there are not so many bad stories either in the water sector. So I think that contributes to it. The other element is that what I hear the most is people telling me we would have loved to do that and to tell those stories and to bring it out and to bring it to a broader circle. We just whether didn't know how to do it or thought it was too difficult or didn't know how to put the story together. And I think you highlighted my use of AI. Um, uh, I have the chance to be at the right time and age, meaning
Mm.
that I can be like the virtual manager on my spare time of some AI robots, which are going to grab the data and then I have to check the data and to make some sense of the results, but I don't have to do the manual handling of it. When I was working at the strategy of Suez more than 10 years ago now, uh, all of that was done with Google searches, which was taking much more time. And I guess the people doing that strategy for Suez 10 or 20 years before me had to give calls because Google wasn't a thing, and so far and so on. And so I think it is easier today to get some help from the tools. And I happen to be probably at the right place at the right time. But even doing so, I am still one hype curve behind you because I don't have your following on TikTok. So
Oh man. Well, Antoine, like I said in the beginning, really happy to finally have you on. And like I just said, I feel like we could keep going off and chatting about a million different angles here. But I appreciate what you do because you are a great source of information for me as to what's happening out there on that business landscape of water. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in person at one of the many water conferences coming up.
Travis, it's been a huge pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm a big fan of what you're doing. You cost me so much time because every time I see one of your stories coming up, I'm like, okay, oh, where did that time go? I watched it, and I maybe watched it twice because really, I love the way you're storytelling around water. So I'm super pumped to be here.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're in the water loop.